All right.
And then we'll minimize that as well. So yeah, I thought it was better safe than sorry. And trust me, you don't want this. It is just a cold, but it's not fun. Kept me up all night last night. So we'll give you an update on the FRMS project and where we're at with it. I'll do more of the business side of things, and then I'll hand it over to Johan to Foley. So a reminder of why we built this first, all right? Because I think this gets forgotten by a lot of people, and it's just very important. And it's not because Mojaloop needed an anti-fraud AML CTF, you know, that would work with it. That's true. That is one of the reasons, right? Those were aligned, but we work with lots of other systems as well. In fact, yesterday, talking to TIC, a series of opportunities came up from that, one of which was you know, a Tanzanian equivalent of E-Trade came up to me afterwards and wanted to talk about how to use or leverage this and the expertise that comes along with it. But the DG you know, wants to talk about how to support anti-fraud efforts within his healthcare system, right, for the country. Ironically, he wants to put that before he, you know, tips, but he is interested in doing this for tips as well. So there's a lot of obvious Mojaloop reasons, but we're trying to make sure that we don't get pigeonholed to being an anti-fraud system for Mojaloop. We don't want to be seen as that. So why did we do this first off, right? Fraud is a huge issue. I like this quote here. With more than 4.5 billion people online, more than half of humanity is at risk of falling victim to cybercrime at any time, requiring a unified and strong response. And that's from Interpol, the director of Interpol, the Secretary General, excuse me. And I like it because it realizes, you know, the fact that we're all in this together. So having a good, strong fraud system or anti-fraud system within whatever you're doing is just flat out important because it affects us all. So fraud is really expensive, but it's for those who are defrauded. And this is where this is the only spot that my slides differ from yours, is that I highlighted this part because I want to get back to it, as well as for the system as a whole. So the cost of offending against fraud and everything else add cost to the system. The cost of fraud that can't be borne by the individual add cost to the system, or you're rest assured that it does. And then, of course, obviously that individual, right, is a problem. But it's also very impactful for government. People forget this. So the government has to police and regulate what they're doing, and there's a huge cost that goes along with that. If we look at the impacts of fraud as a whole, that center section there, human, government outcomes, reputational outcomes, government systems, industry, everything is touched, right? If you take a look at what people are reporting, how much fraud actually costs, you can get some numbers, but it's kind of hard to get from the commercial side because of that reputational damage, right? So people don't like to share. We probably don't have really good numbers on that. But on the public side, it costs between 0.5 and 5% of their overall spend. It's huge, right? So something that runs open source is going to give dramatic cost savings, you know, point period, right? That's what we're trying to do here. I want to talk a second about, go back to those who are defrauded and the expenses in this system. So Glenbrook is running a project right now where they're coming up with a series of policy guidelines for different things. And we were talking, and one of the things that came up was policies that involve regulation. And I said, please don't focus very much on that. And they were kind of surprised. And the reason for that is because, one, a lot of people focus on that already. But more importantly, what I think about with what we're trying to do is we're trying to take fraud out for the individual that can't afford it, right? And if you look at banks, DFSPs, et cetera, they're managed by two different things. They're managed by, yes, happy to keep the regulators straight. You know, everything's good with the regulator. But they're also managed by that loss line. The person is not included in that. Right. So all they care about, and this is nothing bad, this is just business, right, is maintaining the loss ratio at a certain percentage and keeping the regulators happy. That becomes the primary focus, and the individual is lost in that. So what I'd really like to see is the policy that focuses on the whole system, that, you know, and the individual coming out on top of that, right? So that people start to realize that these individuals are hurt, therefore the system is hurt, therefore the overall costs go up, et cetera, versus we go from the top down, what the government needs or what have you. And the government regulators are actually trying to do the right thing. It's just they have to protect a huge system. And a lot of times the individual gets lost in that. So I'd really like us to be focused on the individual in this picture. So one of the reasons we focused on this again was the specific reasons for the individual users, the organizations. If you talk to the smaller organizations, there's a lot of stuff that they don't get to. Budgets are limited, needs are high. The smaller organizations are frequently forced to make do. They just instead of running a transactional monitoring system, they'll turn on all their different throttling capabilities inside their core banking system, for example, and that'll get them by with the regulator, right? But it doesn't actually solve the problem of catching fraud and eliminating fraud. So it's very expensive. So therefore, there's a significant barrier to entry for cost for startups that are focused on necessarily, you know, financial inclusion, et cetera. These systems are also very hard to build and hard to implement. So the bottom line is we could focus on something that is difficult, and that organizations in the region in particular, from my personal experience, are not getting to, right? And drive the total cost of ownership down. If we say, hey, yeah, you can have this, it's free. Obviously it costs to implement, but it's free. It's going to be something to look at versus saying, I just don't have the budget. And that would happen more often than not, trust me. So what we built, if you look at the overall GRC, or the governance risk and compliance framework that an organization has to comply with, there's a lot of different systems. There's stuff that, unless you're in that space, you've not seen, that helps, you know, with assessments, policy management, the compliance rules, all those types of things. And there's everything based around that reporting stack that goes to the regulator. Well, fraud actually isn't reported, believe it or not, right? An individual fraud is not, but AML, anti-money laundering, is fraud, right? So there's usually a fraud associated with that. So it kind of sort of gets reported, but there's separate things that really are. You know, but the key is that the reporting side, the regulatory, the management, all this rolls together with batch in real time, and KYC and UBO and all these other systems. We talk to these other systems. We use pieces of information for the third systems, but we're not those other systems. So we're not KYC. We're not a sanction screening system. We're not ultimate beneficial owner. We are, however, checking for CFT, AML, any types of fraud. We're transaction monitoring. So we're monitoring those individual transactions. We're just the part that's in the lower right-hand corner. So excuse me. What we built, we focused on implementing around 35 of the highest priority fraud typologies. And there's no list that says do these as the top 35. What there is each region, each area focus has their list of what's hot, what they're seeing the most of right now. So this is kind of our marketing way of saying we looked at those lists, and these are pretty much what you're going to run into everywhere. So we implemented these, and we've got a list of about 280, more than 280 other typologies, right? So total typology, excuse me. And they're available to look at and implement as well. Most of them not very difficult to do. So this is implementable by a DFSP, a software publisher. So if someone wants to embed it in their product, payment network, switch. I just talked about a healthcare system, government healthcare system, et cetera. It fits for all of those. Now, for that, to be honest, we'll have to make some custom topologies but the system will support them. It's designed for low cost operation. It's designed to scale up and scale down. We've been talking about that. We were just talking about that. It's hard to design a system that scales up by itself, and it's hard to design a system that scales down. It's very hard to design a system that does both. We have specific components in the stack that help us do that take care of that particular issue. So the bottom line is we focused on these very hard things to do so that users don't have to, right? And we focused on the ability to integrate with all the systems that we need the information from, like the KYC, UBO, all the investigation information, everything that's in the GRC systems. But again, we aren't those, right? We don't do that. So scales up, scales down. It's an engine only, very familiar to you guys because of Mochaloop, low cost, open source, etc. So give you a couple of status updates. The MVP, just a reminder, that was complete in April. The MVP, we do have performance data from that because part of the mandate was to build something that was performant to a certain degree. And we achieved that. But the goal was also to complete the whole system. So that was really the primary goal, was to get the MVP completed. And that's what we worked on. The FRMS Center of Excellence, which I'm now working for, is theoretically created. So what that means is that I'm a contractor, and we're in the process of building that all out and figuring out what that needs to look like as far as an organization. Virtual has been hired to do that, and they're often working on that. And I would hope that by the end of the year, the first month or two of next year, we'll have something solid when it comes to that. We implemented taking everything that was created during the MVP and putting it into neutral systems for documentation, code, access control, and all those things are defined. So we're operating independently, if you will. So all that's done. We spent a lot of time working on the messaging, which it was nice to hear that you guys were doing the same thing. We took some notes. Actually, we liked your 2 to 4 steps, Steve. That was a very good thing. We've been identifying early adopters. Oh, excuse me. We're planning a convening, hopefully for the first week of December, but that convening is for a specific set of people that were in another fraud program, and we would like them to become testers and proof of concepts. So we will work on convening, and we probably need to be, we need to assess whether people are looking for a deeper dive at this point. It's one thing to have access to everything. It's another to be able to talk to us about how this all works. We do have one commercial operator that has worked this already and has customers on the system. So they've got 2 customers on the system, 2 that have signed but are in the process of being implemented. We've had the great UX debate that you guys had as well. So this is an engine, but when we showed it off, it was how do we talk to high-end owners of fraud and risk management, right? It's great we have full telemetry. It's great we have, we can deploy quickly and all those types of things, and we can demo the system. But when they can't see a user interface for how they would administer the system and things like that, it's a little limiting. So we have worked on that, and we came up with a way to deal with that for our convening, leveraging Cybern's components. Cybern is donated them for use during the testing and the POC, and then is offering great pricing on that. So Cybern's already complete as far as that goes. But we also had the great UX debate as far as case management integration, right? How do we when this is all said and done, when we hand over that JSON file at the end of a determination and tells you that there's potential fraud, what do you do with it? And there's an open source case management integration that Foley will tell you about. And this also, obviously, it goes into Cybern as well. Excuse me. So everything is still kind of a work in progress. What open source group do we fall on, for example? Do we join Apache? Is it FinOS? Do we do our own thing? That's being handled by Virtual as well. So we're looking at that. We're due probably to hear back for that in about 5 weeks. So which group do we fall under? What's the nonprofit organization? All that type of stuff. So how do we create the actual center of excellence? So we're still working on things like that. Funding partnerships are actively being sought. Now the messaging is complete. Matt and I can start going around and talking to other organizations to bring more money into the pot, so to speak. On the initial implementations, when I put this together, we had 5. We now have 4 more. So there's a lot of people interested, but nothing's done till it's done. So we have to work those through. We're working with JOPAC, which is the Grenadian Clearinghouse, and Bagserv of South Africa. Tanzania has expressed interest. The folks, WinePay, Works, let's see, TerraPay, and I'm sure there's a few others that I'm missing. We are right now working on a performance case study. So we want to formalize that performance information, and we're potentially working on guidebooks. This is something Matt and I are working on. They're going to push up the chain. One is the how to implement, how to do analysis, how to match what a customer has to the typologies that we can offer, right? And how can they create their own custom typologies? So basically the assessment part of implementation. So kind of a how-to guide on how to do that. And then we've got accuracy testing with the more data that you can work with, the better. The FCA, when we did our testing with data, we worked with their synthetic data. It wasn't up to par. We helped them make it up to par, and then we used it in our formats, and we have that data still. But Lextego went on and continued to work with the FCA and has gone farther with what they can do with synthetic data. And then we were stressing with them how important it is to have real data. It especially with calibrations, things like that. Nothing beats having the real thing, so to speak. So they've gone off and they've got several banks that have donated data. Excuse me. And you have to be on their sandbox and things like that. So we've got a proposal in place for that. Hopefully we can make that fly, because we'd like to do some real world stuff that's more than just with the folks that we're working with. The other thing that we're trying to do is as much of this work through actual implementations. So not a lot of spec built work. So we need to match what Foley and I have on our list, if you will, with what people need, and basically be very customer driven. So we're working on that an awful lot. And then so we're refining the mission based on the market inputs. So and then later in the year, we're actually looking at potential consumer protection mappings, additional consumer protection mappings, and how would we potentially support regulators in this concept as well. But that's theoretical. That would be about a year from now. All right. Foley, you ready?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Here's your technical deliverables part.
All right, cool. Thank you. So so what did we do for the last PI? Like Greg mentioned, there was a big focus on implementation of the FRMS Center of Excellence. So we needed to get our own systems, governance, access control in place so that we have our own Center of Excellence. So we created a neutral Center of Excellence for the code repositories. The link is shown there, so anyone can access it. Then we created the same for the document repositories. So also the link is there. It's a Atlassian documentation where everything resides. We created our own CI/CD pipeline that's up and running so that we can continuously deploy to our sandbox environments as and when required. We defined operational procedures that give someone the idea of what you need to do if you were to run the FRMS application. We created the payment platform adapter for Moduloop. So that's up and running. It's connecting to the event bus, the Kafka event bus. And then as soon as there's transactions flowing through, it drops it off to the sandbox environment of our FRMS environment. Then we created with one open source intelligence data source for sanctions. So that's to prove the use case therefore. As for part of transaction monitoring, there's also a need for sanction screening. So we integrated to the FIC database, and then also had built a rule to be able to scan someone if they're on the sanction list or not. Then we integrated with two case management systems for investigations. So as Greg mentioned, that's Cybrin and Nuxio. Nuxio is the open source one. I've got some screenshots that I'll take us through in a bit. Can
I interrupt you a bit there, Foley?
Yes.
So what we've learned in this process is the case management systems are pretty advanced as far as their open source / commercial model, and really they don't have a lot of the functionality unless you're on the commercial model, unless you've subscribed. So we did an awful lot of integration, but and it is fully integrated with Nexio, but there's limitations. I'm still talking to Cybern about can they open source a version of what they have, or can they create a digital public good licensing model where they don't share their code, but people can still get access for free. And the reason being is it's hard to do without a fully complete system. Theirs it's unfortunately commercial right now, and we'll keep working with them as far as integration, but the CMS, the open source stuff is kind of lacking, which fully will show you. So, sorry, that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And then so that's what we've been doing, and then we've also had some interested parties that wanted to see whatever is under the hood that is not as part of the code repositories and documentation for anyone. That's really just the rules and typologies that's not shared publicly. So that's part of the process that we created, the access control process. And we've already onboarded a couple of people. So that's a works that's here today. Glenbrook, as Greg mentioned, we've given them access. There was interest from MyFOS, so we gave access there. And Converge Solutions is another group that was interested, and we've all given them access to the onboard, to both the code and the documentation repositories that's not shared. There's just a little screenshot of the code, of the documentation that's available. So on the right-hand side, you can see just get an idea of what there is. Okay, so yes, Greg?
I said next slide. I was assuming.
Yes, please. Thank you. So that's a first screenshot from Nexio. So what that is their process builder. It really shows you what has been built and how it all works together. So it looks a bit strange. But that's basically all the buttons that's available on the screens and what would happen if you were to click the buttons. So that's just really a high-level idea of what it looks like, but it's quite an interesting thing to show in a case management system, all the routing that could happen to a case. So I'm just going to go then to the next slide, Greg, which is the first step of the process. So as soon as the case management system, case management service in the engine drops off the case to Nexio, that integration has also been built. So what it would do is it would get the case into this step over here, which is basically the first step that says assign the participant. So that's basically your maker process where someone is reviewing the case and making sure all the basics are there and then assigning it to a participant. And then that goes to the next slide.
Yeah, well, let me add the one thing here. All the data is there. Everything you need to act on is there. Everything's imported. They don't have the componentry to make this a really good looking screen on the right, as far as how you might want to necessarily see the information. You're either going to have to do some serious coding and probably break their own rules to make that screen look good, or you're going to need the commercial model. So that's an example of what we ran into.
Yes, yeah. So as you can see on the next slide, it's basically a similar screen, which is the second step process, the second step of the process, and we called it the investigation process. So at this point, the investigation user or the compliance officer is going through the process, has the option to reject or validate the case, from where it would go to one of the two other screens. But as you can see, all the information from the report is there in a table format. So from the engine, it's a JSON output, and then in that case management service that was built for Nexio, we converted that into a HTML table form, which is giving that user all the information that is from the actual investigation report. So it will basically show you all the rules, typologies, and channels that were triggered, and the reasons for it. So all the way on the right, you can see the rule outcomes in a human readable format, but I think it's a bit small.
Yeah, you really can only show the certain primitives, if you will, without having the for sale version. And so really about the only thing you could do was the simple HTML rendering. It was way better than looking at the JSON, a lot better, but still limiting. Yeah.
So, and I think on the next slide, Greg, it just goes over to show some of the additional functionality that is built into the open source case management system. So there's a case history. So if you were to, from the previous screen, you can then click to the case history. And then there's all the different line items or the audit events that has been triggered. So you can see there was comments added, the system when it was created, and everything else that happened with it. So that's quite interesting that it's built into it. If you then go to the next slide, there will be a dashboard. So that is what a user will see when he logs into the case management system. It will show if there's any additional tasks on his name on the right-hand side. It will show what you've worked on in the past if you wanted to go and reopen a case, and then all the physical documentation or attachments that you were looking at in the recently viewed tab. So it's just showing a bit more of the functionality that it has. And then that's basically it from the open source case management system. So on the next slide, it's what Greg mentioned is what we're working on next. Greg, shall I carry on?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we need to figure out for the performance of the platform. So when we did the POC initially, we got the performance that we wanted and we had a benchmark for it. And since the MVP is now completed, we want to see if it still works at the performance rate that we're expecting. So there's really 5 main points that we're going to work on. There's some optimizations that we know we will need to do to achieve the benchmark that we aim to achieve. So we've got some of that defined, and it's just about doing that. And then we have to scale up the physical software that we're using. So I've got a list there. It's NiFi, Rango, Redis, and Elk is the main components that we need to get the cluster deployments going. We've basically done all of them already, except Redis, I think. But so the rest of them is already cluster deployments. What that basically means is it should be able to scale up as we run the 2 different tests that we aim to run. And then step 3 is the actual running the performance test. So what that will mean is we've got a big data set that we will send and submit to the running instance of the FRMS system, and where we are going to aim to achieve a scale at max scale 3,000 transactions per second. So that's really a short performance test to just make sure that we can get there. Which then leads us into the next step, which is step 4, which is basically saying what hardware do you require to be able to achieve 3,000 transactions per second, the minimum specs required, and everything else. I think we're a bit low on time, so I'm just going to skip over that. But the important part there is to document all of our findings and make sure that if someone wants to take an instance of it, they can just take the same set of hardware that we had to do, and then they'll be able to run and get the scale we want to do. But then the interesting test that we want to do is we also want to run an endurance test. And what that means is we want to simulate a real world environment. So instead of just on a blank system, be able to achieve 3,000 TPS, we also want to do an endurance test to have the system run at scale for a couple of days straight. So basically what that means is we're going to run a test and continuously submit transactions to it for at the rate of 50 transactions per second. And then we're going to scale up to a medium load for some intervals throughout the day. That goes up to 800 transactions per second. And then a couple of minute time slots throughout the day, we will go up to the peak load of 3,000 transactions per second. So I did the numbers for this, but it's not on the slide. But there's a couple of 100 million transactions that we would require, and for the 3-day test that we are going to attempt to do. So yeah, we're very excited for that because that involves creating tooling that's able to submit transactions at those variant rates and also have data. So we need to basically dynamically generate data that's able to go through the system and hit a 1% fraudulent rate. So we've got all of the different typologies, and then we've got instances of scenarios that you would need to be able to raise fraud on a transaction that goes through. So that's going to be a very interesting piece. And that's basically it from what we've done and what our next steps are. So Greg, I don't know, there's more slides, but I think we're out of time. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. I was going to say this is important because we frankly need this to sell the system. So, and just to let you guys know, we put in the index here, you've got these in the slides, just some, how we identify patterns of fraud, roughly how the system works. So we example a scam model here, and how we break the topologies or how they're caught and things like that. So that's really about it. That's our update.
Any questions? I see Tom's hand is already up.
Yeah.
Probably anticipate my question. Greg, thank you. This is great to see. Last time I asked you, you said, yeah, doing anti-trafficking and sex trafficking is a plugin. I just want to keep that at the top of your list, because as you're seeking funding, as you're doing this, you put a payment system up, it's going to be used for that. So, this is me going to bug you every presentation. I'm going to bug you.
Yeah. No, this is an interesting thing, because we have to come up with a reasonable life-like pattern of fraud that gets detected as well, right? So it can't just be transactions that go through the system. That's what makes this a little bit more interesting, is that last part. We decided to peg it at 1%. But the randomness, we're not going to achieve it with synthetic data. That's why it's important that we get that real world data from the FCA, that we have access to that in another project that won't be used in this project. But yeah, it's hard to figure that part out.
Does the OSTRAC connection, if I could put you in contact with the OSTRAC people?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
We should talk.
Yeah.
Yes, we should.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Greg and Johan. A round of applause for them. Right. So we have lunch now, and then this afternoon we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions. There's one surprise session at the end of the day that we managed to sneak in. You do want to be in the room for that, so please keep that in mind. So for the sessions that are in the afternoon, if you could sort of not necessarily rush your presentations, but if you could save us some time, that would be good for everyone. So let's go for lunch. We'll be back in the room at 2 o'clock. The core team will take us inside the loop at that time. See you at 2.